Welcome to episode 169 of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Myers, screenwriter and blogger over at sellingyourscreenplay.com. Today I'm interviewing writer and producer Bryan Bertino. Bryan wrote and directed the horror film The Strangers, as well as several others. He recently set up a production company to produce horror films, and they just produced their first film, The Blackcoats Daughter. So we dig into his career as a writer-director, as well as his new career running a production company and producing films. So stay tuned for that. If you find this episode valuable, please help me out by giving me a review in iTunes or leaving a comment on YouTube or retweeting the podcast on Twitter or liking it on Facebook. These social media shares really do help spread word about the podcast, so they're very much appreciated. Any websites or links that I mention in the podcast can be found on my blog in the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcast, and then just look for episode number 169. If you want my free guide, How to Sell a Screenplay in 5 Weeks, you can pick that up by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. It's completely free. You just put in your email address and I'll send you a new lesson once per week for 5 weeks, along with a bunch of bonus lessons. I teach the whole process of how to sell your screenplay in that guide. I'll teach you how to write a professional logline inquiry letter and how to find agents, managers, and producers who are looking for material. Really is everything you need to know to sell your screenplay. Just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. So a quick few words about what I'm working on. Once again, the main thing I'm working on is post-production on my crime action thriller feature film, The Pinch. We have locked picture finally. So basically the edit is done, and that's great. Slowly but surely it's moving forward. So now I'm in the process of trying to get all the various technical folks on board, get them what they need, all the different technical people they need, different copies of the film, different sound files. The special effects guy is going to need different, a couple of different clips, the high-res clips that he can work on. So I've got my colorist going to work this week doing the color correction, color grading. We're talking about doing some cool filters to give the film an interesting aesthetic. So that will be all through the colorist. I've got my dialogue editor lined up as well. Talked to him last week. He's going to do the dialogue editing, which basically means cleaning up the all the dialogue. You make sure that the dialogue is easy to understand and clear and easy to hear. And then he's also going to do the remixing at the end, which basically means he's going to take the sound design, the dialogue, all the effects, the music and the effects from the composer, all that stuff. And he's going to mix them all together so that they're all leveled off and sound proper and work together. And then I'm still got to bring in my special effects guy as well. So I've got to go through the film, hopefully this week, and really just go through each shot and figure out exactly what special effects I'm going to need. And then that's going to be a matter of packaging that stuff up on a drive. And my special effects guy actually lives in Florida. And so I've got to actually email or actually physically send him a hard drive of stuff. But the first thing I've got to do with that is, again, just view the film probably a couple of times, go through each shot, figure out what special effects I need. There's some blood spatter, some gun, muzzle flashes, gun splatter. There's a couple of places where I want to remove a logo. There's an Apple phone with an Apple logo. Kind of want to remove that. There's a couple just special effects type, CGI type things that I'm going to need. And so that's all, as I said, got to get all that basically. I've got to figure out what I need, and then I've got to get it all packaged up so that he can begin working on that. So again, slowly but surely this thing is moving forward. I feel like another 2 months or so, and I'll kind of be on that home stretch. These guys, all these technical guys, they're going to need probably a couple of months to do what they need to do. A lot of these guys have other projects they're working on. Obviously, I'm not paying very much money for any of this stuff. Just this is a micro budget film. So, these guys have to kind of work, and I have to work around their schedule, and that's totally fine. If it takes a little longer, that's fine. I just want the quality to be there. And obviously, I don't have a lot of money, so I've just got to compromise on time if it takes a little longer than I might want. But everyone seems really good and excited to be working on it. So I'm excited to kind of get into this next stage. So the other thing I'm working on is my new low-budget horror thriller script. I've mentioned that on the podcast before. I've been working on it now pretty much since, let's say, February 1st, something like that. So I'm over, I guess, almost 2 months. I've done the outline, and now I'm about I'm through the first act, so around page 28 of kind of a rough draft. So I'm hoping to kind of keep polishing that, keep writing that. I'm hoping to get that done around the same time as I get done The Pinch. Again, it's a horror thriller script. My idea is to potentially shoot this after I get The Pinch done. So as I said, it would be nice to just simultaneously finish up The Pinch around the time that this script is all polished up. I'm pitching this script as Scream, but at a tech startup company. Again, kind of a low budget horror thriller, similar to Scream, but the people are a little older since they're working at a startup. And as I said, hopefully the timing will all come together. Frankly, at this point, I probably will finish this script quite a bit ahead of finishing The Pinch, but that's fine. I'll just get the script done and then polish it up, and maybe I even start doing a little bit of pre-production if I decide that I'm definitely going to produce it. So that's what I'm working on. Now let's get into the main segment. Today I'm interviewing writer, director, and producer Bryan Bertino. Here is the interview. Welcome, Bryan, to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show with me today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So to start out, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up, and how did you get interested in the entertainment industry?
Yeah, I grew up in small town Texas. A pretty tiny town. Not a lot of artists where I grew up, and not a lot of possibility of movie making. So I don't think I kind of, you hear about all these different filmmakers that kind of grew up making tons of Super 8 movies or videos, and that really wasn't my experience. Mm-hmm. And luckily for me, I had a video store that was, close enough that I could ride my bike to. And so I developed kind of a love of movies, just by picking up random things, this was before the internet. So you didn't have 50 million blogs kind of pointing you in the right direction, or websites. And so it was really kind of sometimes just like picking something up cover box based, mm-hmm. until and making your choices based on that was cool. But as I was kind of getting to the age where college became a possibility, I went to Oklahoma State for a year, and 6 weeks into it was like, I don't want to be a marketing major. I don't want to be a business major. Like the things that I had been told about, it just didn't make any sense to me. So it was suddenly like, well, what do I want to do with my life? And really the only thing that I seemed to feel a passion about was movies. And so suddenly, I had to make a big change. But I didn't, in terms of selling screenplays or even thinking about being a writer, it was 4 or 5 years later, after going to film school, wanting to be a cinematographer, that I moved out to LA, the same kind of story you've heard a million times, where I packed up my 86 Honda, uh-huh. and quit my pizza delivery job and drove out here with $1,500, kind of under the idea of I'm going to figure out a way to be in the movie business.
Mm-hmm. And let's talk about that for a minute, because I get a lot of emails from people, that are moving to LA. So maybe you can talk about that experience. Even just generally, where did you actually end up landing in terms of an apartment, and then how did you get that first job into the business?
I got out here. My girlfriend at the time had moved out 6 months earlier, and she was working at a production company as a receptionist. And so, I was suddenly in Silver Lake. I had never been in a city as big as LA. I'd never, I always tell people, if you're coming from the middle of the country or whatever, that, LA is an adult portion. LA, New York, these are the two places that kind of, you really have to go there knowing you're going to be lonely at times, you're going to be overwhelmed at times. And I was certainly that way. I mean, I came out here, I tried to, I worked on little tiny low budget $200,000 independent movies as a grip and electric. I I talked my way into a assistant editing job at a production company when I didn't really know Avid. I was a runner, just driving tapes all across the city. Anything that I could do to get some, to just pay my bills. And what I think often ends up happening when you come out to LA is that you've come from film school, or you've come from an environment in which you were actually making things. You were actually like telling stories and directing your thesis movie, or maybe you and your friends, and then you come out to LA and you're suddenly getting coffee, or you're carrying the cable, or you're doing stuff that's as far away from what brought you to movies in the first place, which is telling stories or creating. And so really I ended up coming into writing as a way to make movies in my head. It was a way for me, while I was working all these different jobs and not being asked my opinion on anything, to kind of go home at night and imagine, the movie that I would make. And that's kind of what led me into typing out my first script.
Mm-hmm. And let's talk about that now, just for a second. It looks like your first credit is a film called The Strangers. Maybe you can kind of walk us through that. How did you get that sold? And I guess the first question is, how many scripts had you written by the time you wrote The Strangers?
Strangers was the third script that I had written. Okay. I had written a drama first, and I'd taken in film school, I think, one screenwriting intro to screenwriting. And so, I'd written a bunch of 5-page shorts, in essence. And so I wrote a drama, like I said, just kind of for fun, handed it to some friends, expecting, people to say, ha ha ha, fun, funny. And people really responded to it, and people really loved the kinds of characters that I was writing. And so then I wrote a second script, and it was garbage. It was horrible. It was like 150 pages, and there was no structure and no, I'd kind of accidentally stumbled into structure on my first script. And so on my second one, it was all over the place. And so as I approached a third script, I kind of went back to that original screenplay and said, what did I do right? What did I do wrong? And it was only kind of then that I started to realize structure. And so then I was like, and how much structure would matter in telling stories. And so, I started going back and watching all the movies that I grew up loving, and kind of pausing and thinking about, like, where are things here at 30 minutes? Where are they at the midpoint? Where are they? And so then when I set out to write Strangers, I had a much better sense of how to, quote, be a screenwriter. Mm-hmm. And so then I wrote the script, and again was really happy about it, but I had no means to get it into the hands of, I wrote query letters, and, a friend of a friend is an assistant at CAA, or, one of the different agencies. And so sometimes I would get people to read, but I wasn't really, I had no connections and family friends. And so what I ended up doing was I would save up money as I was working on these odd jobs, and then enter screenwriting competitions, because I felt like that was a possibility. There were specific ones at the time, and there may be more or less now, but the one that I had really focused on was the Nichols Fellowship. Was okay. This seemed like a real possibility, because I knew that screenplays, if you finished high enough, you got on a list that went to agents and managers. Mm-hmm. And so I was very fortunate. Strangers finished, I guess, in the top 400 of the 8,000 submissions, and literally was read by a manager, and I sold the script 2 weeks later to Universal, and changed my life.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm one of those stories where I did not have a bank account when I sold my script, and so I didn't know what to do with the check.
Now let's talk about the that's a great story, and yeah, the Nichols is definitely well regarded in the industry. I definitely recommend people check that out. Let's talk a little bit about the getting on as a director. I get a lot of emails from writers saying, "Oh, how can I attach myself as a director?" And I'm always very hesitant to advise that, because I think it can really ultimately sink your chances unless you've got some killer short film that you've directed and really showcases your directing skill. I'm hesitant to recommend that anybody try that, but maybe you can talk about how you got yourself on as a director, and your experience dealing with these people, and had you directed anything before The Strangers?
I mean, I had not directed anything, and honestly, like, I 100% agree with you that when I sold that script, the last thing that I wanted to do was place an attachment of a first-time filmmaker with no amazing short film onto it. I did not want to instantly make it impossible to sell the script. And often if my biggest advice to somebody who wants to direct is to write, but I think it's about getting your foot in the door. I mean, when I sold the script, I was not attached to direct. And in fact, when I sold the script, I was fired by Universal 6 weeks after, because they wanted to change the script into a completely different direction. And so, I did a rewrite. They didn't like it. They went in a different direction and brought another writer. It was only 2 years later, or about almost 2 years later, that they went back to the spec and were like, we've messed this script up by having all these different writers and different takes. And it's like, now it doesn't resemble the thing that we liked in the first place. Let's go back to the spec. And in that process of going back to the spec, they brought me in to have a conversation about it. And suddenly, I walked out, and an hour later, my agents called saying that the studio wanted me to direct the film, which is a story that never happens. But the part that I wanted to focus on for you is, the work that I did taking, after selling that script, continuing to write, taking rewrite jobs, like working in the industry. I worked for, I got a rewrite job for Jerry Bruckheimer Films. I wrote a blind script for Scott Rudin Productions. So I was working for two of the biggest producers in Hollywood and getting notes and learning. And so when I think that's all of that helped me, so that 2 years later, when I went in to take a meeting, I was able to talk about the movie and talk about the script in a more refined way. And so, I would almost advise people that are wanting to direct, that are writing, just get in the game, get your foot in the door as a writer, because, that's hard enough to be in the big leagues, and it's such a massive adjustment period that, if you continue to do good work, directing will come around, and, that door can open later on. You don't have to have all your dreams come true in the first 5 minutes of walking into LA.
Yeah. So sound advice. So let's dig into The Blackcoats Daughter, which is a film that you produced. Maybe to start out, you can just give us a quick pitch or log-on for that film.
Blackcoats Daughter is it's a movie about it's funny you'd say that. It's a hard movie to boil down into one line. I mean, I think it's really a movie about loss and connection, but it's set in a boarding school and over one kind of winter break where someone is kind of faced with a darkness, and a decision has to be made on, do you go towards the dark or not, and what are the ramifications of that.
How did you get involved with this project?
A few years ago, I decided that I wanted to start producing. I feel very strongly about horror and the directions that I believe, and that it can be so much more than often what you end up seeing when you're looking at kind of traditional Hollywood films. And I found in my own experiences it was very difficult to find like-minded producers or executives that were willing to kind of think, you can have drama and horror mixed together. And, talking to different writers around town that love the genre, but felt the same way I did, that they didn't really have a home for it. Mm-hmm. and didn't have people that were there to help the process. So I decided, I worked with an executive a few times that I enjoyed, named Adrian Biddle, and we started this company under the idea of saying, hey, we can be that producer that can, you would have a home to have someone kind of encourage those kinds of stories, from people that actually love the genre. And so we sat down and just started working with different writers and kind of let everybody know that you could be comfortable, that we weren't here to take your idea and change it into something that fit some sort of mold. And we were instead going to do whatever we could to encourage or improve upon the idea that you wanted to tell. And so, with Oz, we read the script, and, honestly, like the way, I love when I can pick up a screenplay, and not that it's a book, but at the same time, especially with horror, like if I can read a script that's in the genre, that there's a tone to it that I can feel and I can see the movie, and it's not just bland, one line that says boo, mm-hmm. and instead is actually creating an atmosphere. It always excites me. And if you look at Oz's writing, it was very clear from 5 pages in that he had a voice. And so, as when I finished the first draft, I had a feeling that it amazes me now, because I was involved with the project for 4 years. When I saw the first cut of the movie, it felt like that script. I felt the same. The mm-hmm. script wasn't all the same in different moments, but like that voice, that tone had resonated 4 years later, because Oz had a vision for the movie from the get-go.
Yeah. Now, just walk us through your process of getting scripts. How do scripts come into your company? I know there's going to be a lot of writers thinking, this sounds fantastic. How do I get my script into your hands? Do you typically take things through agents, or do you take personal recommendations? What's the submission process like?
I mean, there's, some of it's personal recommendations, some of it's, through my agency. I mean, we're a small company, so, and we're very hands-on. So, we're only going to probably develop, so many production companies that are developing 20 projects, 15 projects at a time, we're developing 3 to 4 a year, so that we, and so, the process for us is often, I mean, look, Hollywood's an animal, and what that animal eats is scripts. So, a good script, I, of course, want to get my hands on, but yeah, it's something where we have to be very selective, because we know that as I said before, I worked on this movie with Oz for 4 years. Mm-hmm. It's a long, we're going to be there for the long haul, and so we have to be very careful about what we're working on.
Yeah, sure.
So that, we can be there for them when they need us.
Yeah. So as an example, how did you get this script? Was Oz somebody that you knew, like just you've known him for a few years and read this script, or was
no?
it?
I mean, it had come. Yeah, and we someone I think Oz's manager at the time had reached out to us, and I think that, you know, he had gotten the script out to a few people, and I think that it had helped him get a manager, and then that manager had reached out to us, and a guy that worked at our company read it, and, you know, he was reading, you know, he'd read tons of scripts, and he knew that it was something that he thought that I would connect to and that Adrian would connect to, and then it kind of filtered up to me.
Okay, perfect.
You know.
Yeah, how can people see the Blackcoats Daughter? Do you know what the release schedule is going to be like?
Yeah, I mean, it's on Tuesday of this next week. I don't know when this will air, but
yeah, so you're saying
March
28th.
Yeah, on the 28th it'll be released, and you'll be able to see it on iTunes, yeah, Amazon, all the digital platforms. Okay. You know, and then it's a limited theatrical release on, you know, that Friday, but I think it's fairly limited. So I mean, really, it's, you know, Amazon, iTunes.
Okay.
Are you know, and right now it's also on DirecTV.
Okay.
So yeah, those are all the different places you can check it out. Perfect. It's a really great movie, and I hope everybody enjoys it. It feels like it has a 70s vibe that I think that a lot of people respond to.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good. Bryan, I really appreciate you coming on and talking with me today. Good luck with this movie and all your movies in the future.
Okay, thank you.
So, thank you.
Have
we'll
a
talk
good
to
day.
you later. You too. Bye. A quick plug for the SYS Screenwriting Analysis Service. It's a really economical way to get a high-quality professional evaluation on your screenplay. When you buy our 3-pack, you get evaluations at just $67 per script for feature films and just $55 for teleplays. All the readers have professional experience reading for studios, production companies, contests, and agencies. You can read a short bio on each reader on our website, and you can pick the one who you think is the best fit for your script. Turnaround time is usually just a few days, but rarely more than a week. The readers will evaluate your script on 6 key factors: concept, characters, structure, marketability, tone, and overall craft, which includes formatting, spelling, and grammar. Every script will get a grade of pass, consider, or recommend, which should help you roughly understand where your script might rank if you were to submit it to a production company or agency. We can provide an analysis on features or television scripts. We also do proofreading without any analysis. We will also look at a treatment or outline and give you the same analysis on it. So if you're looking to vet some of your project ideas, this is a great way to do it. We will also write a logline and synopsis for you. You can add this logline synopsis writing service to an analysis, or you can simply purchase this logline and synopsis service as a standalone product. As a bonus, if your script gets a recommend from a reader, you get a free email and fax blast to my list of industry contacts. This is the exact same blast service I use myself to promote my own scripts, and it's the same service I sell on the website. It's a great way to get your script into the hands of producers who are looking for material. So if you want a professional evaluation of your screenplay at a very reasonable price, check out www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/consultants. On the next episode of the podcast, I'm going to be interviewing writer-director Matt Hanley. Matt recently wrote and directed a short film, which I thought was excellent. So I invited him on to the podcast to really help us understand the nuts and bolts of producing a no-budget short film. He literally shot this short film on an iPad, and then he used a whole bunch of different apps that he downloaded to the iPad to get it through post-production. And we talk about exactly what apps and tools he used to create the film. Again, I think it's literally, I think he spent less than $200 producing this thing, and it's really kind of a cool film. I will link to that in the show notes next week. And again, he comes on and really we dig into just everything he did, nuts and bolts, and he'll really explain in great detail exactly how he did this short for, again, I think it was less than $200. So if you're listening to this podcast, if you've been listening to this podcast for a while and thinking about writing and producing a short film, this is really going to be a great episode for you to really dig into those nuts and bolts. Most of the people I would think that listen to this podcast, they probably have a video camera on their phone or their iPad. And so this is just very much well within the scope of what just about anybody who's listening to this podcast could actually accomplish. So keep an eye out for that episode next week. To wrap things up, I just want to touch on a few things from today's interview with Bryan. I get these questions a lot. Do I need to move to LA? And I have an FAQ page set up, and I try and answer that question succinctly on the FAQ page, but I get people constantly coming to me. Hey, do I need to move to LA to be a screenwriter? If you've ever wondered if you should move to LA, I think Bryan's story is a great example of how moving to LA can be a huge benefit and can ultimately pay off. So, if you're thinking about, do I need to move to LA, really listen to this episode and think about sort of just the things he's talking about. And even in those low-level positions, he was kind of getting a little bit of a foothold in the industry just by working these low-level jobs. And that really cannot be underestimated. And there just is not that kind of opportunity outside of LA. Maybe a little bit in New York. Maybe there's a few pockets here and there where there's a lot of production going on. But for the most part, LA is where most of those jobs are going to be. I also think it's interesting what an entrepreneur Bryan is, starting his own production company and trying to find material. Even though he's a writer-director, he's still trying to look outside of himself for other projects. One thing I would say for sure, the most successful people I've met in this industry are people who are very entrepreneurial and are always trying new things and trying to get new ways to get projects off the ground. So just again, really keep that in mind. If you're just sitting in your room writing day after day, you don't feel like your career is moving ahead as fast as you might like, it might be time to get out of your comfort zone and try something new. Nothing, just being in your room. And again, I totally understand that because I consider myself very introverted, and I really got into writing just to be a screenwriter. I wanted to sit in my room and write. I don't necessarily want to deal with a ton of people. Be a manager and a producer and these kinds of things are not things that I think come very naturally to me. But again, I think just getting out of your comfort zone and trying to make things happen, trying new things, I think it's really just the greatest way of actually moving your career forward. Anyway, that's the show. Thank you for listening.